all, I would like everyone, please, if you've got a cell phone on, put it on silence. That's one of my pet peeves, is a cell phone ringing right in the middle of something. So please, if you can, put that on silence. Okay. I'm Schelley Brown, and I'm the director of the Dorcheat Museum, which you'll get to view here later on in the evening. On your table in front of you, you've got some cards for our gift basket. If you have not filled those out, please do so. We'll just kind of pass them to the front and set them on the stage. Liz back here, if anybody does not have one of the cards, raise your hand and she'll get you one. Has everybody got one? One of the gift cards for the gift basket? And the gift basket is compliments of a KCS employee. And we've also got a gift basket or a surprise gift basket to give to our guest speaker tonight. And I'll do that here a little bit later. But just want to welcome all of you. This is our third event for the museum. And all three of them have been, I think, very successful. And all three of them have brought out a different group of people because it's been a different interest for all of them. Lots of railroad folks in Minden, and I've had calls all day today, all last week. Just real excited about our speaker tonight. A lot of things are going on at the museum. On your table also, we have a volunteer sheet. We need lots of volunteers for different things. If you would, and you can volunteer for one of those items on your sheet on the table, please just write your name, your phone number, and I'll add you to our list. We're going to need various things, and I've got a description of those tasks. We had some people that filled it out last time, so if you would, and you can help in any way, please fill those out, and we'll pick them up at the end of the night. We are going to draw for the gift basket after Webster Nation speaks. Then after that, we will take a tour of the museum. We'll have the museum open probably for about an hour after the talk. So if you don't know where the museum is, it's just right around the corner or right through the alley on Pearl Street. But if you haven't been there, this is a chance for you to go see it. I promise you, you're going to be very impressed. Everybody that walks in there, the first word out of their mouth is wow. And I think that's everybody that's walked in there. It's very, very impressive. We've had a lot of volunteer labor. Had a lot of people that donated labor, and we're very appreciative for all those people. The museum is designed by Larry Milford, and this is my first time to work with Larry, and sometimes we clash, but for the most part, Larry is an artist. I mean, he has all this in his head. He knows exactly what he wants it to look like, and he can draw it on a piece of paper and make it happen. I like things to happen faster. Larry likes things to happen later. And Thad likes things to happen now. So between all of us, I think we're getting it done. But the museum's going to open June 10th, which is a Tuesday. Our hours are going to be Tuesday through Friday from 10 to 12. We'll close for a couple of hours, and then we'll open back up from 2 to 4. Saturdays will be 10 to 12, and then also by appointment. We're going to be scheduling meetings and tours and whatever else. If you've got a homecoming class or a reunion, or you want people just to see it, you can always call us, and we'll make sure that we go down there and open it up for you. You've also got some pledge cards in front of you. Museums need lots of money to operate, and so if you can give a little, we'll appreciate a little. If you give a lot, we'll really appreciate that too. So please fill those out if you can, and you can mail those in. You can give them to me at the end of the night, whatever. We've also got on the table, and Lou will be back there, I think, a little bit later, but we have the 2 DVDs from our last 2 nights at the museum. And one's Marcus Rand, one's Frank Griffith. Those are $10 each, so if you want to get the last 2, we've got those over there. Also, we have our cookbook, which is paid for our roof on the museum. So if you don't have one of those cookbooks, those are $15. Please pick up a cookbook or 2 or 3, because we have quite a few of those left, so we need to get rid of those. Let me see, anything else? Volunteer sheets. I think that's it. I'm going to get John again, which is our local historian. Without John, I would be lost. I have to email him about every other day and ask him, who is so-and-so and how are they related to so-and-so. And either him or his mother can tell me real quick how all that works. But John is just a wealth of knowledge, and he wanted to introduce our speaker for tonight, and so I am going to introduce Mr. John again, and then he will lead us from there.
Well, everybody that got up here and talked, the first thing they said was wow. And people who remember the Dorcheat meeting, the 4 and 5 members, when I say this, it kind of is wow. We're going to take a highlight various sections of the community, and why I asked for this one is because it's the first one that really touched me personally. You know, the railroad in Minden is kind of an odd story. You can pull things back from about 125 years ago, say that the railroad was going to be the death of Minden, because the S&P almost was. But then things changed somewhat with the L&A, and the Buchanan family touched into Minden. First with the Bodcall Mill, and then some of us that have connections, that sounds funny to say for being a railroad person, but anyway, feel like the L&A, saved Minden after the Bodcall Mill burned during the Farm Depression in the 1920s. And the railroad community very rapidly became an amazing part of Minden. I think it's an amazing part of Minden because that's why I'm here. My grandfather, J.C. Higgins Sr., or somebody might know his nickname. I was stunned. His nickname was Wendy, which we'll leave aside why they call him Wendy, but he'd like to talk a lot. So anyway, came down in 1923, bought my father, and brought the family. Of course, we still be in States. But, which doesn't sound very fun to think of it. But anyway, now I've been to Arkansas, I apologize. About 1930, 1 person in 4 in Minden lived in a railroad household. So you talk about the reach of the railroad being so strong. And it developed in those years that as a voting bloc, they tended to vote together, and it got to the point that a city council member almost automatically came from the railroad. One of those city council members was a fellow named Briscoe Nation. And Briscoe Nation had a large family, 12 kids. And tonight, we're going to get to hear from one of the best ones in that family, Webster Nation. Webster Nation, raised here in Minden, went to Minden High School, was a football player. He would have finished with my mother's class in 1939, that she claims is the best ever. But he stayed over to play football after that. Went to work for the L&A Railroad and had a distinguished career, not just with the L&A, but as you're going to hear, I imagine, internationally, as a railroad engineer. Got a lot of railroad stories to tell. And I want to touch back on one thing you may not mention in this speech, because it's kind of a touchy situation. When you all go to the museum tonight, on Pearl Street, you're going to be walking the area of the street where his father was, in one of the more tragic episodes ever to happen in Minden, was killed in a political assassination on November 11th, 1933, right there on Pearl Street, leaving the family of 12 children. Now, I only mention that because that 1 in 4 people in Minden being from the railroad, it kind of was a community and almost a family. And I didn't realize things quite so much when I was researching that killing. I discovered that my grandfather was actually a pallbearer at Briscoe Nation's funeral. So railroad folks have a lot of ties together. I can't say I felt the family when Mr. Nation broke a hat, gave me my last whipping I ever had, but the Nation family made great contributions to Minden, and I'm excited to hear tonight Mr. Nation's story of his years with the railroad and what it's brought to the fabric of Minden's history. So without further ado of you taking over, let's hear Mr. Nation. Webster Nation.
And I'm paraphrasing this, and have named it the L&A as I knew it. I didn't know, when I was a youth, there were trains coming in and out of Minden, and they were going in all directions. Great Depression it seemed like that it was over. it was time for me to determine what I was going to be, and I guess at 12 or 13 I decided that man running that engine over there, I want to be like him. I want to run an engine. And until this day, I was never sorry of the decision that I made when I was a youngster. I chose that career as an engineer. And it was a hard job. It was a very hard job. But you grew to love it. And I did. Of course, at that time, you had nothing but steam engines, and I was young. Went to the superintendent's office when I was 18 years old, Mr. Johnson. And I told him, I said, Mr. Johnson, I want a job. And he said, he knew who I was, and he told me, he said, you can't start to work now in engine service. I said, you're 18 years old. Son, you gotta be 21. I knew that I couldn't wait until I was 21. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll hire you as a clerk. And when you get of age, we'll put you in engine service as a fireman, and you can stay there 3 years, and then you will be promoted to an engineer. And it sounded like a good deal, but I knew that I had my mind made up to be an engineer, and so I went to work as a clerk. And about the time that I went to work as a clerk, business was getting good on the LNA, and the depression looked like it was over. And I went back to see Mr. Johnson. I said, Mr. Johnson, I dislike this job as a clerk, but look, I want to get an engine service. He said, how old are you? And I looked at him and I told him, I said, I'll be 19 pretty soon. He said, when you get to be 19, come back and I'll see what I can do. So when I got to be 19, I come back and I said, I'm here for the job. And he told me, he said, told his clerk, he said, line him up. He said, because he's gonna run me ragged if you don't line him up. He's here all the time and doing the job. He said, line him up. He told me, he said, you know, I'm bending the rule, and you better do a good job out there. You know it's a hard job, but it's a good job. And then he permitted me to transfer into engine service. And I worked in engine service. I went to work as a fireman. And at that time, when you left Minden going south on steam engines, everything was steam engines. There wasn't nothing but steam engines, and there were some good ones on the LNA because we had the best engines there was in the country anywhere. And when we started the first night that I worked and we were headed south, I got down through all of the boondocks down there, and I found that I was traveling through places where there were no road crossings, places where there was nothing but virgin pine timber as tall and nearly as high as you could see on both sides of the track, and mile after mile. And I saw this as this is the thing that I was looking at, and I saw it, and I was, every day I look forward to going to work. I look forward to going to work. The job paid good during that time, and there was a certain knowledge that I always had, and that was watching that engineer. I had a favorite engineer. All firemen had a favorite engineer. This engineer had a seniority date on the LNA in 1903. That's the year that he started work as an engineer. And I'm going to tell you this, that he couldn't read and write very good, but he was a master when he got a hold of that throttle, and he could make that engine sing a song to you. And I watched everything he did. You know, firemen had to watch everything that an engineer did, because if you didn't, you were in trouble. But if you saw that engineer reach up and get that throttle to shut off, you knew it was time to reduce the oil. And you did like that. Well, this engineer could make that engine, even when it was down in a hard pull, it'd make it sound like that it was nothing to it. And he was the calmest man that I'd ever seen. He could sit there and run that engine and not pay a bit of attention in the world to me. But every now and then he'd look over and say, "There's something to me," in a way he said, "You know what I'm doing now?" And I said, "No, what are you doing it for?" And he would explain what he did it for. He told me, he says, "You know these engines?" He said, "We have 5 new engines now, and they were big engines, good engines. They just had been delivered out of Lima, Ohio, and with the 561 through the 565. He told me, and we had one of them. We won 15 and 16 out of Minden. He told me, he says, "You know, each one of these engines has a different personality." And I said, "Mr. Martin, don't you think that word would be characteristic rather than personality?" He said, "You call it characteristic and I'll call it personality. Because each one of them, they might have looked as the same thing, but and acted the same way, but each one of them had a different characteristic about it." It didn't take Gary Martin long to find out what the characteristic on any engine was. And for that reason, I watched him. I watched him for everything. All that he did, I fired here then for a year and a half. And about that time, the draft come along. They had a new place for me to go. I left the LNA, and I went to the Army. In the Army, well, the first thing that they told me is that we want you in a railroad operating battalion. Well, I was thinking, where in the world would I operate a railroad? You certainly wouldn't operate one in the Philippines, because there wasn't any. And there's no need of me learning here in the United States, because they already have engineering and firing here. Never heard of there was going to be a landing in France some of these days. But nevertheless, there came a time I took all of the basic training in the Army, and the invasion had just begun. I went to France on a Liberty ship, and I was 12 days on that ship, and 12 days I was sick. I was so sick, and that boat was going up and down. And then I landed in Minden, Scotland. A beautiful place, and I said, "Oh man, what?" All of a sudden I got well and started eating. And I said, I think I could spend about 6 months here. I like this place. Beautiful place. The next morning I looked out, a row of trucks lined up. I wonder what they're doing out there. Get your gear, get it together, everything you got, get on the truck. They didn't tell you anything. And by 5 o'clock, we were down at the English Channel. And it was pretty close to dark. And we were loaded into landing barges. Well, a landed barge carried 20 men with a full field pack. They'd move in as far as they could go, and about 400 yards before they got to the place where there was land, they would let a tailgate down and tell you to hit that water. And I hit that water, and it was the coldest water I ever saw in my life. I didn't think that ice water could be any colder. And we landed in Normandy. Started to work. Started the engine service at Dreux, France. From Dreux to Versailles to Paris. A hard job, really a hard job. You work day and night. Sometimes you were out there 2 or 3 hours. I had a diet of K rations and C rations. You can pick either one you want. You eat all you want because we had plenty of those, but that's all. And we worked in there, and we hauled all the supplies to the front. And it was train after train lined up. Sometimes we would be on an engine for 3 days, sometimes 2 days, and sometimes we'd get over the road in a day. That was in 1945 then. It was getting along. Toward the end of the year there, and it was kind of cold, as I remember. It had begun to get cold in September, but we hauled trains to the front, and we'd get to the front, pretty close to the front. You could hear the guns going, but we'd get close to the front, and they had a stockpile there. And they'd unload these trains, and back toward the port we'd go, and we'd get another train, we'd take it to the front. And we did that, and the coldest year that I ever saw was in 1945. That was during the Battle of the Bulge. And we were up around Metz, and it was too cold to do anything. It was 7 or 8 below zero there. And we knew the war was soon going to be over, but it just seemed like it was dragging on out. But we lived through the winter, and on May the 8th, the day that the war was over, 1946, we'd been kind of loafing around the station, and a major come to me and told me, he said, load all your gear. I want you to go to Strasbourg headquarters, first MRS. And you go, and I said, for what? And none of your business, just go. I told you to go. And this is exactly what I did. I got my stuff together, and that was the last time I ever saw any of those fellows that I were soldiering with. But when I got to Strasbourg, I was introduced to Colonel Diamond. He was a full colonel. He told me, he said, you'll be working for me from now on. And I'll tell you what I want you to do. I want you to get acclimated to a locomotive. And it's at a shop. You'll have instructors. You'll have people there to answer any question you want to answer. And I said, could you tell me about it? He said, yes. We've confiscated Goring's private train, and you are to be the engineer on that train. And I said, well, I have no choice. He said, yeah, you have a choice. But he said, I'm telling you what you want to do. And you go ahead and do it. Any choice you want to make it, but I tell you what you want to do. I had a special trainer in Germany. He spoke good English, and he told me he told me everything about that locomotive. That locomotive would run 125 kilometers an hour, and he told me how to run it and taught me how to operate. It had 3 different kinds of brakes. magnetic, electric, and air brake. And it was classy. Inside it had golden chandeliers and silver placemats. It was something outstanding for one to see. He said, and I had a bedroom right behind the operating end of the engine. I ran that engine in for 6 months until in December. But one day in September, a lady called my wife and she says, "Here, your husband's in Newsweek here." And his picture said, in Newsweek. So my wife got this paper, and sure enough, she'd send me a copy of Newsweek. Newsweek had took our pictures, and we were, both of us, both the engineers, we were sitting there together. And that's how she knew what I was doing. It was living from May 8th until I left there in December. It was like living like a king's son. I had a man to take care of all of the cleaning. He took care of my food. He took care of everything. And this king's son lived well for a period of about 6 or 7 months there, until I got ready to be sent home. But this train, I ran it all over France, all over Belgium, into Switzerland, into Germany. And you take a 24-year-old engineer with a locomotive like that, a train like that, and nobody was on that train riding under a full colonel. You had to be a full colonel before you. But they were disposing of the rolling stock of the railroads, and it was they were doing a good job of it. But I tried to, at that age, I tried to see how fast those trains would go, and they would go 125 kilometers an hour. The regular over in South France, from Lyon down to Dijon, Valence, and Marseille. Those places where I kind of got used to them, and when you pass those block signals all green, and they'd be whooping by your head. Sometimes I was sorry we didn't go with 125 kilometers an hour. But time ended, it was a change. Come home. Boy, the L&A was booming. And everybody, I had to work 3 more months as a fireman before I could be engineer. And then when I got promoted in about 3 months, and the paper mill at Cullen was beginning to go real good. The Calumet at Cotton Valley was putting 30, 40 cars of oil out a day, man. And we had 6 passenger trains at that time coming in and out of Minden. We had the Southern Belle, sweetheart of American trains. We had the Flying Crow, as straight as a crow flies. Then we had the Shreveport, St. Louis overnight. And I'll tell you, Minden was booming, and we had 8 freight trains coming through Minden every day. steam engines were hauling them, but there were many times that the steam engine had to cut tonnage because they couldn't. They just couldn't handle the kind of tonnage that was sitting there in the yard waiting on to be transported to Cullen or to some other place over the system. But things were booming everywhere. The shops in Minden, they were wide open. The diesel shop was wide open, and there wasn't a time there was trains going in every direction. And listen, the LNA was a rich railroad at that time. It had more business than it could ever have. But then one day, there was a change. The LNA had taken over the LRN side of it. And they too were enjoying the same kind of business. Pete Couch was the president of the railroad. His brother Harvey owned the railroad. But this couldn't keep on going. Things were going too good. Then one day, well, the KCS became the ruling. They merged with the LNA, and they became the ruling railroad, and things began to change pretty quick. Then 2 passenger trains were cut off, and that lasted a few months, and 2 more were cut off, and that lasted a few months, and then one passenger train was rerouted, and it didn't come through Minden. We had no passenger trains in Minden at that time. But we had 8 freight trains. But the change was going. Because I'm going to tell you, the cost of a steam locomotive and was 2 times what it should have been to operate. Diesel began to show up. And the diesel power, you took on 2 engines, and if that wasn't enough, all you had to do is to cut another unit in and use 3. And you didn't leave tonnage anymore. You took everything. But then Calumet began to slow down. The railroad began to dieselize everything. It was a sad thing because I loved that steam engine and the way that it would sound at night. You could hear it sound, and you knew if you had it hooked up right, it would tell you the story. It would tell you the exact story of the things that you were doing right. And I began to think of what the old engineer told me, that maybe it does have each one of these locomotives has a personality. I don't know, but I still call it characteristic. And but I hated to see the steam engine leave, but it came a time then all the steam engines were going fast. They were being replaced by diesel. There was 23 stations open between Hope and Alexandria. And when they started the diesel movement, and it was replacing all of the little stations along the wayside, it wasn't very long until 5 or 6 of them were closed down, and then 5 or 6 more was closed down. It wasn't long until there were only 3 stations out of those 23 that was open between Hope and Elliott. And business began to fall off. Cullen was reducing. Virgin forest had been cut. There were 12 sawmills on the LNA, on the first district of the LNA. And some of those sawmills were closing down because those virgin forests that I had seen when I was a young fireman, they had been cut. And listen, these were land grants. And they were very handsomely paid for, too, because I'll tell you, the owners of the railroad had a lucrative railroad here then. But things began to go downhill. Culling slowed down. It cost too much to get pulpwood there. It wasn't long before they began to close down part-time. And then we would close down longer. The oil shipments were being closed down. Then we began to lose freight trains. Cut the freight trains down to where we were having 4 and 5 instead of 8. No extras. Things were slow. It got worse than that. All of the stations then had been cut down. The sawmills had been cut down. And listen, those sawmills were producing 4 and 5 cars of finished lumber. And it was a handsome paid billing situation for the LNA. The LNA was a booming railroad at that time, just before that time. And you could see it going by the wayside. And then it wasn't long until there were 3 or 4 freight trains, more wayside stations had been shut down. And then Cullen, the paper mill at Cullen, shut down for good. Then they had a little freight train running from Minden to Cullen and doing a little work, switching at Cullen and at Cotton Valley. And that was all going on. In a few more months, the railroad between Hope and Spring Hill was taken up. The railroad between Sibley and Alexandria was taken up. The only railroad that was open was 30 miles to Spring Hill and 30 miles to Shreveport. That was all that was left. Now, the LNA was just about gone. And they sold the KCS lines, sold this little railroad that was left in Minden. And now there's one little railroad left in Minden. It does not even carry the name LNA any longer. And you know, it was always a sad situation. It was a sad situation for me to lose the steam engine. But the sad situation for me to see that a railroad that had such a booming period in history that this had. Trains running in every direction, always, everybody was proud of their job and doing a good job, but money took over. And, you know, there came a time when on the LNA, we had caps like this. And they had LNA, the better way, on that cap. And then when the KCS took over, they had LNA, and a locomotive in between, KCS under. Wasn't long before they had KCS, and then LNA under it. And then there came a time that there was nothing but KCS lines. And now today, we don't hear of any LNA. I saw a booming railroad in a booming city. And I saw it come to life, and I saw it die within a period of 60 years. And, but I wouldn't trade my time here for any other way. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
KCS Engineering Department Employee of the Month.
Thank you.
And I know you go fishing all the time.
Oh.
So here's a KCS thermos,
How nice.
and there's some coffee mugs and all kinds of KCS stuff in there, but no LNA stuff.
The caps told the story about the other day.
Yes, well, let me give you that.
Oh, I appreciate that so much, and I
Appreciate you.
wasn't expecting this.
Go up and hip him down.
I got to get some help
Oh,
down there. My eyesight, bad.
I hope you've all enjoyed
Oh.
night with the LNA and night with the KCS. Has everyone please turn in their cards for the gift basket? If you haven't turned your card in, do so now and lose going around getting them, and I'll grab them. Okay, go ahead and fill them out. Mr. Nation, do you know who was in charge of tearing down the old depot down the hill?
The KCS Railroad permitted it. Now listen, I'm not downgrading the KCS Railroad because they were a railroad of the future. Today they're doing great, and it was a money situation with them, and nostalgia didn't matter.
Didn't matter.
No.
The depot was offered to the city.
Was it?
Yeah, but they didn't want it.
And we got some good pictures of the depot over in the museum that y'all are about to see. But I do want to thank y'all all again for coming tonight. We're going to try to do these every month. We've got different speakers lined up. I know in June, we're working with Dr. Steve Kirkikas to come in July. I'm sorry, July 4th. She'll jump up.
Yeah. He had, they couldn't find the place, they just got here.
Oh, okay.
He's got some of the caps, the different.
Forgive me for interrupting, but I remember a relationship with a dear old friend. Years ago, he was general chairman of the Board of Engineers. And I was a little young clerk in Kansas, Missouri, when he came up there to visit one of his old buddies, or not so good buddies, by the name of Townsend, when he was conducting business. And I've had the good fortune of being down here since 1963. And I haven't had a chance to shake his hand in 15 years. So I was one of those lucky people that got to be assistant to the head transportation officer down here. And I've got to see these gentlemen work over the years and give up their lives to the railroad. It was very meaningful for me. Thank you.
How many, I want a show of hands of everybody that is a railroad employee and has railroad family or works for the railroad now. How many people are here that they're associated with the railroad in some way or another. And
I'm still paying to retire.
yeah. And he was going to show y'all what working for the railroad for a long time can do to you, but he says he can't do it on demand. But he can make a train, a sound that sounds just like a freight train. And so when we go out to eat and we get ready to go, he makes this sound, and we always say the train's pulling out, so it's time to go. But he'll have people turn around to see where the train is. Can you do it?
I don't know.
Try. That's what working for the railroad can do to you. Has everybody got their cards in? Everybody got their cards in? We're about to spin here. And we've also got a lot of pictures up here. If y'all want to come look at the pictures that Mr. Nation brought, he's got some really interesting stuff up here. Janice Bryan. And there is a KCS stress reliever there. But I do want to thank all of you again, and like I said, we're going to do these monthly. We have different speakers lined up for July. We have Mr. Kirkikis that's going to talk about the immigrant families that came to Webster Parish, and that's a very interesting story that he has. Still working on the one for June, but we're going to have different speakers every month. Talked to Sidney Cox this week. He came and he was just amazed at the museum, and so we may have the Cox family come and do a little performance and tell about how they got started with, in bluegrass. So we've got a lot of very interesting things, and we really appreciate y'all coming every time. And I think every time we get a few more different people, which is good, because then you can go back and tell your friends and family what we're doing here and how interesting the museum is. And we hope that you'll support the museum in the future. So I think Larry, where's Larry? Larry's going to go and unlock the museum.
One question.
Okay.
If any of you have anything small that experienced a tornado that you found that belonged to your home, that's not very big, it could be a broken cup, it could be anything. We'd like a few fragments. We have a tornado that's going to be in the museum, and I want to put some of these objects in that tornado that, for the display. So if you would be willing to share some of the things that you might have as a young child or a young adult picked up after the tornado, we'd appreciate it.
And he'll show you when y'all go over to the museum tonight. We've made some progress just in the last month, so you'll be able to see some of those. But we've got everything turned on. Does anybody have any questions?
Schelley?
Yes.
I think you need to let them know before they go, because you can't tell them. The museum is a long way from being completed. We've just got the first part of it done.
Right.
I also think you need to let them know that we've got about nearly $200,000. We've already got it and paid for what we've got done there. We own the building, we own another thing in, but we need a lot of help. But y'all, we're trying to save the history of Webster Parish. And we want you to really get interested in the history, because it's something, if we don't save it, we're going to lose it. So that's what we're trying to do with the Dorcheat Museum. I'd like to say that the reason it's called Dorcheat, because that's the whole parish is concerned. But anyway, I think you'd really be excited and be impressed when you go see what we got done.
Right, and like Marcus said, this all takes a lot of money. We've spent a lot of money. Everything's paid for, and it's all from private donations. We did get a $50,000 grant that helped with our exhibits, but we have spent 3 times that, if not more, this year. And you'll see why when you go over there if you have not been. So there's pledge cards, like I said, please, if you can, make a pledge to the museum, join the museum, and I think somebody behind me wants to say something, so I'm gonna let Mr. James back.
For a long time, I've asked Schelley to let me speak, and she turns me down every time. So, but she did make a mistake a while ago. She says, anybody got anything to say, any questions, anything? No, this is just really probably directed more to Mr. Nation than to everybody else here. I think he made probably one of the most interesting talks about the railroad, and some of us lived some of those years and had some memory of it. My dad was a fireman on the L&A Railroad. But one thing that's happening today, to show you the difference of the day that we live in is versus what Mr. Nation's days, and what he was talking about, they were hard days. They were long hours, and those were tasks performed by good men that did not mind doing what it took to get those jobs done. Today, our railroading, as Danny knows, has changed quite a bit. My company, when I first started in business, we didn't use railroads. Everything was done by truck. But the railroads started to make a little coming back, and like Mr. Nation alluded to, I saw them take up rail after rail after rail. And today we have what we call as a short line that works here in Minden. Most all of my product comes out of Arkansas or either out of Texas. That comes to my plants. I have about 12 plants over this part of the world, in Texas and Louisiana and Arkansas. And what happens is, after a while, our highways and trucks could no longer furnish the demand that we had. So today, we're in a completely new era of moving materials in this country. The railroads today are pulling record tonnages. Matter of fact, the railroads today really doesn't want your business. It's just that simple. They got more business they can handle. And these trains are putting what we call unit trains. We'll order a train, and all it'll have on it will be, crushed stone that goes to one of our plants. And it'll have 100 to 125 cars of crushed stone. They usually have 4 engines, depending on where it comes from. Mr. Nation knows this better than I do, but they base the number of engines off the number of cars that you put, because that's how many tons that you've got to drag over these hills and through these hollows. Our country's not near as bad as the West, where we got a lot more grade out there, and it takes a lot more engine, a lot more tonnage to pull that. But it's a real interesting today that what the railroads are doing, and the railroads are really making a boom. They're coming back, and whether we recognize it or see it too much, they're building a lot of what we call passing tracks. These passing tracks, they built one last year down here at Civic. And what these are long tracks that let that entire train get off, because they're running more trains today. I was in Marshall, Texas last week meeting with the railroad people over there. We were trying to upgrade our rail system over there. And they are running now. You heard Mr. Nation say we ran 6 passenger trains and 8 freight trains out of Minden. Passing through Marshall, Texas, they're running 47 trains a day, and they say they've got to double it. That's a lot of freight coming through. They're calling that route, and this is on the southern, but the Union Pacific line, and they're calling that route the Meridian Express. And you cannot stop that train, and you cannot get on that track for any reason. And they have about a 15-minute interval. When our trains get there, they've got to exit and get completely off those rails and get out of the way. And then they give us 18 hours that we unload those 100, 125 cars. They leave the engines hooked to them, and the crew stays in a motel. Either they pick them up and go somewhere, but they bring those crews back. And when we get through, those crews get right back on the engines and go right back to those quarries. All that train is doing is hauling crushed stone to my plants and to others. But the railroad industry is really a fascinating industry. If you stop to think about it, it's the only industry that I know that is still absolutely operating with the same type of tracks, same type of rail, same width. Now, we are upgrading the weight of our rails because we put in a lot heavier trains than they used to put. But it's a fascinating industry, and again, I want to thank Mr. Nation. I think he did an absolutely marvelous job of his narration, the way he explained everything, and it was a story worth telling. And I'm glad I'm here tonight and got to hear this story. And again, thank you, Mr. Nation.
And also a reminder too that this DVD will be for sale probably tomorrow or the next day for $10. So if anybody wants one, you can pick up one of those sheets, you can call me, and you can get a copy of tonight for $10. Yes, sir.
Ask Webster why he retired as an engineer. They set the great big cushy seat down and push buttons in there.
He just didn't like the KCS.
Like when he went to work, they were beeping.
I think Larry has gone over to open the museum up for us, and I think Lou's gonna go back here, so anybody that wants to pick up the cookbooks and the last 2 DVDs, we have those back there for you. And we will see everybody at the museum, and we hope that we'll see you all next month too. If you filled out cards, you'll get a card from us, so please fill out something or contact me.